During the move from the 16-bit era to the 32/64-bit one, many games were attempting a proper transition to 3D. Ones such as Mario and Zelda doing a perfect transition, ones such as Castlevania failing miserably, and ones such as Sonic not even getting a chance till later. In fact, most of Nintendo's major SNES classics were already hot on the move to get that transition. Even the likes of F-Zero and Earthbound, albeit the latter didn't pan out so much, but one major title was already a mystery as to why it never was there, one by the likes of Metroid, on a console that had already proven capable of exploratory dungeon crawling mechanics by the likes of The Legend of Zelda, or simply moving it in a fully 3D environment without the need of pre-rendered backgrounds like Super Mario 64, while shootings such as GoldenEye 64 had proven with how well it can work on the console. So as such, you'd think that Metroid would be a no-brainer, but the story gets quite complicated. Today, we shall explore the mystery of Metroid 64. If you enjoy this video, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button too, to further support us and keep creating new videos. It was the year 1995, and the Ultra 64 was well in development, with many of those old 2D franchises being experimented on and made into proper or improper 3D entries. Just a year prior, Super Metroid had been released to the market and was highly acclaimed for its groundbreaking nature, presenting not just a very well laid out map to explore, but as well as an atmosphere and tone that just set the series on a whole other plane as one of the best games made yet. And so there was high pressure amongst series co-creator and director of Super Metroid, Yoshio Sakamoto, on trying to make that transition to 3D. While 3D space and level design was one that would of course need serious thinking, Sakamoto's first instinct was as to how Samus would even move in 3D. The controller for the N64, or rather the Ultra 64 at the time, saw much influence from the development of Super Mario 64 to refine and work well in moving through 3D space, a move that one would think would be perfect for Metroid. However, it never was going to be that simple, as when Sakamoto decided to hold that controller for the first time to get an idea, he just couldn't imagine how Samus would move around with this setup in full 3D. While Sakamoto hasn't specified as to exactly what didn't make the transition feel possible with that controller, it still has logic, as the N64 controller, while great in moving and pressing a button to jump, while also hitting another button or two to attack, was something that may have not worked out so much for how complicated Samus was to control. Obviously, Samus could run around with the analog stick, jump with B, and shoot with Z or A even, or would it with the latter? This is where the problems could have been witnessed by Sakamoto, whereby he may have wondered as to maybe while Samus runs or jumps, how would she aim? Especially with the analog stick already occupying 360 degrees of movement. Now, more obvious than that is that yes, there are solutions around this, and Samus for one could simply move with the D-pad and aim with the analog stick, but that might defeat the purpose of truly moving in 3D space, or even using a lock-on system like Zelda, which in itself could have its own problems, as it would require one to lock onto a block, shoot it, and clear it away to move along. But with how inanimate objects were rather hidden as destructible in previous Metroid games, Sakamoto might have not wanted them to be lockable as a result. Of course, there could be the idea of stopping, holding a button, and aiming, which might have not been something Sakamoto liked, as up to that point, Samus moved fast and shot, which would have defeated what Samus was known for at the time. And it definitely was not just a run and gun shooter where you could turn it into a Doom clone and have Samus move and shoot straight at whatever is in front of her. Whatever the issue was, the N64 controller wasn't one that was compatible with what Sakamoto envisioned for what should be Samus, with all her bells and whistles functioning perfectly in 3D, and therefore he decided not to make the game on that console. While Sakamoto had entirely given up on trying, Nintendo HQ themselves were hell-bent on making this a reality. It is as such that Nintendo at one point or another had approached another gaming company to make a Metroid game for them, but said company had declined as they felt that they couldn't make a Metroid game to stand up to the quality of Super Metroid. a feat that had made Sakamoto proud of how good of a job they had done on that game. But many have wondered, who was that company? At the time, Nintendo's relations with third-party studios were strained, and likely it wouldn't have been one that was too distant from them. Therefore, what would make more sense were rather their second-party companies, namely Rareware. This has as a result led many to feel that Rare was the company that was approached, and that they might have even played around with that idea. This rumor being fueled by Jet Force Gemini's lead designer, Martin Wakely, who has said that Metroid had a major influence on the game. Now, influences are a normal matter in gaming overall, and this may very well have been the case here too, as Jet Force Gemini was a game that was a futuristic game that involved exploration and shooting at aliens. As a result, some theorize that this very game might have been built off of an attempt at trying a Metroid 64 concept to see if it even was possible before giving Nintendo the no. And considering how gameplay-wise it is actually quite different and nothing like Metroid, that could be what led them to give Nintendo that no. However, the rumor itself stands on shaky grounds, as Wakely has went on record to say that all he has ever heard about a Metroid 64 was in a boardroom meeting of the idea being tossed around, but that's as far as he ever heard it go, which may very well mean that Jet Force Gemini was never a Metroid game to start. Whichever company it was, it still stands as a complete mystery to date. Now, many over the years have wondered how a Metroid 64 could have worked. Some simply say the Sakamotos could have simply went ahead and made another 2D Metroid, considering Castlevania did just that with Symphony of the Night and was successful. But it's clear that there was unnecessary pressure to try to make everything work in 3D space at the time. But yet there have been groups such as In Denial Game Studios, which have attempted at making their own Metroid 64 that I have been showcasing throughout this video, and what they think it could have been like if it was made, making it look like a promising premise involving locations that look like they have been pulled straight from Super Metroid but in full 3D, platforming ahoy, third-person shooting together with a lock-on system, and iconic enemies from the series. However, this does clearly take influence from Metroid Prime in its approach, which at the time, Sakamoto wouldn't have such knowledge to think up of such a robust concept for the game, especially since Sakamoto at first wasn't confident in the idea of Metroid in 3D when he heard of Prime in development, until he saw it himself in action and absolutely loved it. Which shows that at the time, Sakamoto's idea of Samus running around in 3D was one he may have not understood well enough when he first held that N64 controller, and it took for him to see it to see how it actually can work versus what he personally may have imagined. Which brings us to 1998, as by then, Nintendo was already in the talks with the infamous Jeff Spangenberg to create a new corporation by the name of Retro Studios, as a means to make more mature games for Nintendo. But as they were coming to mid to late way into the N64's life cycle, their games were already from the get-go being planned for Nintendo's next generation platform, the Nintendo GameCube, which after a few failed attempts by Retro Studios at making original properties, Nintendo finally saw to give them the Metroid IP, an IP that other studios they asked to make into a 3D series had rejected. But Retro Studios decided to take that challenge on. A challenge that went through much changes, evolutions, and even putting Samus in first person, but yet perfectly bringing 2D Metroidvania gameplay into the third dimension in what would be one of the best transitions from 2D to 3D, known only as Metroid Prime. Creating what would be a perfect balance of a lock-on system for shooting, while minimal need for manual aiming so fluidity stayed persistent and not feeling ever too different from 2D Metroids, and in fact standing as a clear evolution to the series. A series that still persists to date, with a fourth 3D entry as of this video being hotly anticipated. And thank you for watching! Please hit the subscribe button, for I'll plan to be back with more Metroid and other games gaming history soon. Hit the like button and comment below on how you think Metroid 64 would have been. So everyone, thank you for watching!